Welcome to our second roundtable, this one on regulation and social media. So, first of all, I want to thank all the participants for have kindly accepted to participate in this roundtable and to share their thoughts with us about this question of regulation, a really complex topic. I will just start by briefly introducing our guests, really briefly, okay, and then we will have each one of them will briefly also have initial presentation of their thoughts about regulation and social media, and then we'll have we'll further discuss the. So, Pereira is media analysis, so I will just perhaps point, but you have the names to help you out. Media analysis technician at the Media Analysis Department of ERC, that is Portuguese Media Regulatory Body. Okay. She has participated in working groups devoted to research areas such as media literacy, protection of minors, or disinformation, just to give you some examples. Our second guest, and it's Lukasz, not Andrei. Okay, so Lukasz has kindly accepted to replace Andrei. It was a last-minute change. So, and as Andrei would be here as member of the coordination of the Compact project, Lukasz will perform the same role. Okay, so he's also part of the coordination of this European project. He's a postdoctoral researcher and e-government deputy unit leader at Insight Center for Data Analytics of the National University of Ireland, Galway. Our third guest, Bissera, Zankova, also is part from of our project Compact. So she's an independent researcher and consultant and as president of Media 21st Foundation, which pursues projects in freedom of expression in media and journalism, and Media 21st Foundation is one of the partners of Compact project. Our fourth participant, and to my right side, Gergely Gosztonyi.
Close.
That's right. It's from Bulgaria, that's major, so it's really difficult. Okay. He's a Hungarian lawyer, professor and media researcher at the Faculty of Law from a university that sites in Budapest, and I will not try to read Hungarian again. So since 2015, he's coach of the Hungarian team for the Early Morrow Prize Media Law Moot Court competition. Additionally, he's also one of the members of Compact. And last but not least, Professor Jorge Pereira da Silva, who is Dean of the Católica Lisbon School of Law, where he's concluded his law undergraduate studies, his master's and his PhD. He develops research mostly in public law. Okay, just briefly present. And now, perhaps by this order, to start with Porwol, 5 minutes.
I think I won't take so long. As the media regulator, we don't have in Portugal and in many other countries any legal framework to deal with social media, the platforms themselves. So we have in our body 2 moments in this fight. I'm saying fight, but not in a way. Against disinformation, and that is before the term disinformation and then after the term disinformation. And the public agenda of EU helped us a lot in this. And so, because we think as a national authority, we would never manage to achieve results on this. So, before 2018, we looked at social media by their content, what they share, what people complained about to us, to work, about social media contents, what they read, what they see, and then they feel it's not right, and they came to us. But we didn't have answers for them. So we create guidelines, internal guidelines to deal with those particular issues and questions, but we didn't have really answers for people. What they want from us is, what should we do with things we see in social media that we think it's not right. People always, so these guidelines were addressed mostly to news pages or news media pages, and people feel that that wasn't right, that content wasn't right, that there was misinformation, that there isn't very rigorous. So we started to contact media companies and give them some insights on what people really were concerned about. But we didn't get very good answers or very answer that we can give to people. And so we went on this, but without getting any really results that we can present. So when the EU came with the disinformation and their agenda on fighting the disinformation, then we felt that something good came from that, and then we think the code of practice is a really good instrument. The code of practice against disinformation is a really good instrument that is giving us some good results on fighting disinformation. Of course, it is a very, very, very complex subject, and we are going little steps, step by step, but we think the platforms engaging with this code of practice is giving us some very good insights on how, not at a national level, because we think that it won't get any good results or big results, but we think at the EU level we are starting to achieve some little good answers from the platforms. So we think we are with ERGA, that is the European Regulators Platform, getting with some good results, and the work in progress reports from the platforms are showing us that. So I would like maybe discussing with you this something, other questions you should pose us, but for now is everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Lukasz?
Okay, so thank you, Cátia. First, the line of introduction. So I'm not Andre. This is my second one. I'm undercover here a bit. So I'm actually the coordinator of the Compact project, and we are very happy that we have such a rich audience today here. The work led by Andre deals with a lot of communication, communicating with various entities across Europe in many different states, and trying to get feedback on regulation, on their views on regulation, on progress of regulation, and that was gathered in 2 reports. And I might say a few conclusions so far. So, of course, regulation is missing. We have laws in some states which are binding, but people are not aware of them. So, for instance, in Ireland and Sweden, we already have a law for defamation and threat, which also is valid in terms of online media. So, if you defame somebody on social media, it's as valid as I would speak against anybody here live. But it's only Ireland and Sweden so far. And this law is not, let's say, executed as it could be, but it's there. So it's just basically that people are not being prosecuted yet. But if I could technically sue anybody who says anything bad against me on social media. So there is some regulation, and there is voices that maybe we don't need extra regulation. It's more about executing or using existing rules in a way that would be suitable. So there is some truth to it. However, I must say colloquially, there is a lot of avoidance as well. So people say this is not our area of expertise. We don't know about social media. It's a new thing. Let European Union take care of that, or even better, a lot of people say Ireland should take care of that. I don't know if you know why. So I'm representing Ireland today here. So you know there is country of origin rule, which states that those companies, those large companies, multinationals, are bound by the legislation of the country that they have headquarters in. And as you all know, most of them are headquartered in Ireland, right? So whatever is decided by Irish legal bodies is actually bound in the entire Europe. So no wonder Mark Zuckerberg actually came last September to talk to my friend Hildegard Norton, who is the chair of Commission for Communications. And they spoke about what to do next, because he's afraid of losing 700 million people market, right? This way or the other. So of course he came and they talked. So there is a lot of pushing around in this sense. People say, okay, this is not our responsibility. It's either, as I say, Irish responsibility or European Union. So at the end of the day, nobody does it. And on the other hand, you have social media companies like, of course, Facebook. And they are coming and say, please regulate us, because we don't want to regulate ourselves. So yeah, nobody wants to regulate, and some are suspended in the air, and we are going like this for a couple of years now, and there is no good resolution. So I would say that's on the very surface of what we discovered. There is more issues like the diversity, cultural diversity, which was another thing quite maybe surprising, that as far as we are united in Europe, there is significant cultural differences. So for instance, things that are totally acceptable in Sweden will be totally unacceptable in Portugal for whatever reason. People have different views on what is ethical, what isn't, what is right to be shown to children, what isn't, you know. Some more liberal countries will say this is totally fine, and country have no, no way. So how do you deal with those differences? So again, there is need for more comprehensive dialogue in terms of regulation and having representatives from all the states in order to address that. But I think the conclusion could be that we need something which is high level enough, not to go too specific in regulation. We cannot, you know, go through every single functionality of existing platforms and say this is the way it should be regulated, because this is ineffective, because it works for Facebook of today, but will not work for the Facebook of tomorrow, which may happen very soon. And also, these are the platforms today. In 5 years, maybe they won't be even around. So how do we address the issue? We'll have another legal framework in 5 years. We know how fast legal frameworks work, right? They take quick actions, right? Always. So yeah, we need very robust frameworks which will be generic enough to address the upcoming things, and things that I was talking at the last session today, like XR, augmented reality, virtual reality. They are coming big time, you know, and combined with artificial intelligence. I think we discussed a lot about the social media of yesterday. We are not talking about social media of tomorrow, which are coming big time. And all those companies in question here, they are actually investing a lot. So you will regulate whatever happened yesterday, but they will be already ahead. They don't care. So that's the point. I think that we need to be prepared with more reasonable, very generic form of regulation, and people have to come together, not point fingers. I would say last thing is, again, about coming together, like smaller states, European states, let it be Slovakia, where Andrzej is from, or other smaller states, they just don't have leverage. So if they stand against those companies and they say, we don't want this in our country, Facebook says, okay, no problem. Not a big deal. We can survive with, 2 million less users, So that's the problem. So I think Europe has to come together as a large, big market and entity, and whatever is allowed in one state shouldn't be allowed in others the same way. So there shouldn't be major difference there. But that's, I would say, that few last words. Thank you.
Thank you. Bissera?
Thank you.
So we will
Yes. Thank you.
Really?
Thank you, Cátia. Thank you for inviting me to this fascinating event. I think that you support me in my conclusion that we are living in a very exciting time, and we are immersed in a complex and multidimensional setting where there are different subjects operating and competing with each other. And these subjects can be media, they can be quasi media, they may be no media at all, they can be intermediaries or hybrid structures that complement different functions. And just observing this great diversity, the problem of regulation is really very topical nowadays. But also the question about over-regulation and freedom. And I would say that still the debate remains very general about regulation, about just about the concept or the notion of regulation. But being a lawyer, I would like to say that for lawyers it is very important to perceive regulation as bodies and procedures. So what is important, what matters in fact, what kind of bodies will be set up and what kind of procedures will develop in the new digital environment. I would like to make a bridge to two other previous symposia carried out within Compact. The first one was in Budapest in September, and the second one in Sofia in November last year. And different ideas about regulatory bodies were also discussed, not only generally about regulation. Thus, for instance, in Budapest, the idea about setting up an arbitration body at the level of social platforms was raised by a colleague. Even he suggested that these arbitrations could be established on a global scale. What was interesting in Sofia that we continued the debate about regulation, but then we discussed more precisely and more closely, we looked into the new idea of Facebook to introduce corporate self-regulation through a new mechanism. At first glance, this mechanism consisting of a kind of triad, the company, Facebook, the trust that would be supported financially by Facebook, but would be independent, and the oversight in the board that would operate, and its members would be appointed by the trust, and in fact it would operate also assisted by technical secretariat at the level of Facebook, but on the other hand, being supported generally by the trust, and all this governed by charter resembles the structure of a public service media. But in Sofia with us was Ms. Gabriela Czech, who is a policy director for Central and Eastern Europe, and she explained that Facebook is not public service media, even not a media, but something in between. I have come across different statements that Facebook performs a public function. It doesn't mean that necessarily performs a public service function, but we'll see how this new mechanism will develop in the future. Later in this discussion, I will share my concerns about some details concerning the organization of the oversight board and the supporting trust. But I would like to quote again Mr. Zuckerberg from 16th of February this year. He attended a conference on security in Munich, and then he said that there are two frameworks that regulate the media. One is the framework for newspapers and existing media, and the other is the telco type model. For me, this type of these two mechanisms are oversimplified because there are many more regimes that could be put in force. Even if a given platform performs several functions, there could be a media function there, and this media function could be subject to a specific media regime, while the other functions could be regulated in a different manner. What I think is important, what will be the foundation or the benchmark for such regimes or mechanisms? And it will be very important to remember that all these regimes or frameworks, they should take into account human rights and how to protect best human rights. And then I would like to draw your attention to a very important document that is not reflected, for instance, by the Charter, published by Facebook. Though in this charter, Facebook mentions protection of freedom of expression, other human rights are not referred to. So this document that I'm speaking about is the UN guidelines for business and human rights from 2011. And it is very relevant for any private company, not only for Facebook. And these private companies should elaborate policies that respect human rights. And they should implement due diligence, how their activities impact human rights, and they should set up the appropriate rectifying mechanisms. In my opinion, we have to answer a lot of questions and before embarking on one particular regulation, because there can be many approaches. And think also that we shouldn't stifle freedom of expression on social platforms through overregulation.
Thank you very much.
Should I stand up?
Oh, yes, because you have slots, yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So first of all, as a lawyer, when I hear you have 5 minutes, I ask that, okay, judge, is it 15 or 50 or, but I try to keep it short. We always forget one thing, I think, and where it is. So I made a short presentation, if I can do it. Yes. So how not to regulate social media? Because we are always talking about how to regulate social media, and we are always forget, okay, we are evil politicians who are regulating our stuff, but we are usually forget to implement somehow the aspects of not only the evil politicians, but the regulatory body, because this is a bit different from us. So if you will be a politician on one day, then I give you some suggestions how to be a real good politician and how to get very good credits from the voters. So the first thing is that we heard from Lukasz, and it's very interesting and it's very reflecting to that. So you should act. I don't care if there is a regulation. I don't care if there is a need for regulation. You should just regulate. And then we are going to the overregulation part, and we could see that in very, very different countries. Because on one hand, you could see in the public eyes, you are strong, you are fearful and everything, and a bit powerful. And then on the other hand, you are just like this guy, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. We saw those wonderful pictures on the Congress hearing in 2018. And of course, this lady, maybe you know her. She's one of the leading figures right now as a prominent figure, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, I mean, there were so many news on the internet that she grilled Mark Zuckerberg in the hearings, and it was pretty funny because she asked questions about how could Facebook be free. Is it true that Facebook is collecting data? Yes, of course. And so basically not very clever questions she asked, but as a politician, that was the perfect job she could have done. On the other hand, it's very important if you are a politician not to target the real problems and to target very slight problems because it's easier to sell it. And I saw sometimes that, for instance, we heard about the Facebook Cambridge Analytica thing, and we heard about the Russian meddling with the US election. And the problem with the Russian election is that nowadays we could see that in some US countries, they would like to ban the whole system of bots. And this is somehow way too much as it was originally intended. We will see examples for that. On the other hand, I don't know what's that. Sorry about that. So on one hand, Mark Zuckerberg said that, as many critics have pointed out, the law lacks clarity. Of course, it's an ongoing debate. It's a long debate as a lawyer, how we should regulate, which terms and which definitions should we use. There is a very famous European Court of Human Rights decision which said that to avoid excessive rigidity and to keep pace with changing circumstances means that many laws are inevitably couched in terms which are vague. Of course, we use vague terms and it can't be clear enough. So if you want to be a good politician, just use very vague terms and you could define everything. On the other hand, we have some problems if we are not using the proper definitions. And for instance, at the moment, we have problems with intermediary liability, who's liable and who's not. We don't have any idea. We should remove content in an hour. We should remove content in 24 hours. We should remove content in 7 days. We should remove content in 1 month. Very, very different timing and very, very different definitions. So we don't really know the time frame about that. Don't consider the circumstances. Of course, you shouldn't define if it's a big company or a small company. Of course, we know that if we are making rules, those rules apply for Facebook, but those rules apply for very small business companies also. And we could see that sometimes those rules that are created for big companies could ruin small companies, and we should consider it. If you're a politician, you shouldn't consider it at all. There is a question that what we consider illegal content. I mean, there are so many fake news, deep fake, hate speech, sex trafficking, child abuse, revenge porn, copyright questions, defamation, cyberbullying, terrorist content. Should we consider them as one? Should we consider it as, do they share the same legal nature? The answer is no, but in most legislations, we just tackle them as illegal content. Of course, it's much easier to regulate, but sometimes we just have to handle this question differently. And as we heard, there is, on one hand, we should act like we are an island. We are countries, we solve our problems, I win my own election, and I don't care about the rest. But I'm pretty sure that this is a very short-sighted view about that. And I always tell my students and my colleagues that anybody who's dealing with media should face one thing, that what is media or media legislation right now, today, is legal history tomorrow. In one day. So this is one of the most constantly changing field of legislation and field of the world. So we just couldn't forget that. And I'll skip that, sorry about that, and I'll show you some examples about how we try to regulate the field. And there are good and there are bad regulations also. And just to handle, maybe you heard about that, it was from 2018, the German NetzDG, when you have to remove clearly illegal content within 24 hours. In the US, someday, it was basically half a year ago, it was in last summer, there was one politician who suggested that the moderation practice should be politically neutral. I can't understand that, to be very honest. So who will decide what is politically neutral? Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? You see, so it's basically impossible to do that. There is Australia this year. Oh, I mean, that was last year. Okay, basically that was last year. So there is 3 years prison sentence. 3 years prison sentence for posting online. This is for all of us. It's so easy to post anything illegal when we don't know what is illegal and all the things I mentioned. And Singapore, there is criminalizing fake news from last year, and the government could decide what is fake news on a case-by-case basis. This is basically impossible. China, of course we know China. Sorry about that. I was at a conference once and I told China, and there was a Chinese lady, and it was very bad. So I'm really sorry about that. Russia, they just switched off from the internet. When I started my research career 20 years ago, I was very interested in censorship, and then it turned out that censorship has gone. I'm very lucky, it's not. Censorship is back again. And of course, we're just cutting down the whole internet. There is internet shutdowns in everywhere in the world. Last year, there are approx 200, I don't know how many countries right now at the moment, 206 or something. Last year, 26 countries, 10% of the countries shut down the internet for at least 2 days. 10% of the countries. And this is just something like that. You just wake up in the morning and you don't have internet. Oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. What day is it? What time is it? And stuff like that. You know? Okay, and 2 days ago, it was in the UK, and this is the last one. So 2 days ago, the UK proposed a plan that the Ofcom, which is the regulatory authority of the UK, they have the possibility, this is only a plan, so this is not a legislation so far, they would have the possibility to legislate social media content, and this is back to you. From the first presentation, the keynote speech, as you suggested, there should be some kind of body regulating those things. This is what in the UK presentation at the moment, they created the white paper last year, and this is their suggestion right now. So what could we do? Of course, we should change the politicians. That's a very easy and suiting answer. But on the other hand, there could be this fiduciary model. We already heard about that. I think that what Bissera told, that the regulation should err on the side of freedom of expression and not on the side of the state. We should need, of course, we need greater transparency, but what's most important and what we always forget, that this is not only a legal question. This is a legal question, a social question, a technical question, an economical question, and an organizational question all together. And it's so easy to forget about that. Thank you. We should balance that. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, last but not least, Jorge.
Well, thank you very much for having me. To understand how to regulate social media, we need to understand first why we want to regulate them, what purpose regulation should achieve, and what values should it serve. We are aware that social media provides today the main infrastructure for public debate and access to information that is essential to democracy. We cannot take democracy for granted, as we know it, and it requires a healthy public sphere of debate where freedom of speech can be exercised openly. Public sphere is the institutional home for freedom of speech in all its variations, like freedom of press, the right to inform, the right to be informed, and so on, which are altogether the oxygen of democracy. By default, social media are designed to respond to economic incentives, to create revenues for their shareholders, and not to promote a better environment for the exercise of public liberties. It's business. It's not about defending public interests. And primarily, there's nothing wrong with this model. But if I have a pharmaceutical company to make profit for my shareholders, at the end of the day, and at the same time, I cannot ignore that I have also a responsibility to public health. Social media, just like their predecessors of the 20th century, mainstream media such as newspaper, magazines, TVs, and radios, developed three main functions in the public sphere of the 21st century. It facilitates public participation, it organizes public conversation, and it creates public opinion enforcing community standards in terms of service. This is obviously the most sensitive of the three functions, but it's not new. It's the digital equivalent of the editorial judgment made by directors of newspapers, TV channels, radios, and even book publishers, applying their own set of norms of civility and behavior. The difference is that mainstream media produce the content that they publish and broadcast to an audience that is mostly unknown, a certain representation of the public. By contrast, social media circulate content that were produced by everyone else, independently or professionally, and disseminate those contents within a well-known community. The audience is not an abstraction anymore, it's a set of personal profiles. That's why, even today, at least some of social media still argue that they cannot be responsible for the content that is published by users in their platforms. Basically, they say, I'm just a messenger, I'm not responsible for the message. If you don't like the message itself, please don't blame and please don't kill the messenger. This vision is a gross simplification of reality for several reasons, but mostly because social media are not just the poor guy that receives and delivers the message. They are much more than that. They take a lot of profit from spreading the message, and they hijack people's brains to promote the viral dissemination of contents, even when they know in advance that the content is illegal, false, or harmful. Nevertheless, if social media perform the three functions I mentioned, facilitate public participation, organize public conversation, and enforcing community standards, just by doing that, they already make a significant contribution to the values of democracy, promoting democratic participation, widespreading of democratic culture, and the growth and spread of information and knowledge. A healthy system of free expression requires much more than that, requires much more than non-censorship by the state, and much more than a platform or a few platforms provided by private players. It requires knowledge institutions like schools, universities, newspapers, museums, archives, and so on, a diverse and antagonistic sources of information, and those institutions and sources should be trusted and trustworthy. Without these institutions and normative conditions, public debate will generate, and for instance, politics will be reduced to tribalism and cultural participation to warfare. That's why regulation of media is needed and should pursue the preservation of a healthy system of free expression and a vibrant sphere of public debate. Self-regulation has a role? Yes, it has. Independent inspectors, ethics committees, and ombudsmen are important? No doubt. Is it sufficient? No. Just look at the history of Facebook. Engaging in that behavior, getting caught, apologizing, promising not to do it again, making some cosmetic changes, but keeping the same business model. Engaging in that behavior, getting caught, apologizing, promising not to do it again. Just like my 8-year-old son. Do I let him self-regulate? Establish his own limits? I don't need to answer this question. Given these purposes of regulation, the next question is how to regulate. The first advice is not to circle around the problem. Do not try to reach social media and limit their activity through the regulation of basic internet services or payment systems. If the core problem is content regulation, we need to target directly social media companies, no matter how strong and influential they are, and establish 3 sets of rules in 3 different areas. First, antitrust and competition law. Second, data protection and consumer law. Third, liability applicable to certain categories of illegal or harmful activities. Be careful, because if the regulatory frameworks become too heavy, we can create barriers to new innovative companies to enter the game, and our goal is exactly the opposite. First, antitrust law comprehends the prohibition of mergers and acquisitions between big players operating in the same market, but also preventing big companies to buy new startups in the early stages of development, because this can have the potential to challenge their market position in the near future. Aggressive acquisition strategies that are common in this area not only undermine competition, but also tend to block innovation. On the other hand, antitrust can also justify splitting big companies. It's difficult, but it happened in the past. Separating different business areas that are currently housed in the same companies. For instance, advertising, delivering content, and moderating content. If we want a more diverse and open sphere, basically we need more companies, but smaller ones. About data protection and consumer law, we all know by now that data is the new oil, that the digital economy is data-driven, and that those who own the data will own the future. The European Union has here a very different standpoint than the United States, and obviously China, which are the 3 relevant markets here. Not the Portuguese market or the German market. That's very important, because there's a chance of the GDPR becoming a normative standard even outside the European jurisdiction. Because if foreign companies want to do cross-border business with Europe, they need to comply with the European Union data protection standards. Here, important regulation is already in force, and there's more to come from the European institutions. Today, citizens have a say about the use of their personal data, and we find that should prevent social media from engaging in strategies of surveillance capitalism, collecting massive quantities of data about all of us, treating users not as clients, but as simple products, and selling all the data, all the profiles they create to the highest bid. GDPR empowers private citizens through a new set of fundamental rights that protect their privacy, like the right to access our own personal information, the right to rectify that information, the right to be erased, the right to be forgotten, etc. Companies have a duty to take good care of personal data, respecting confidentiality and good faith. Finally, comes the elephant in the middle of the room, establishing rules of liability in a field where immunity will continue to be the rule. In other words, balancing liability and immunity. Distributor liability starts when companies receive notice or should detect that a certain content is somehow unlawful. For example, terrorist indoctrination, promoting the practice of crimes, child pornography, revenge porn, copyright infringement, obvious breach of privacy, violation of state secret or professional secret, moral or sexual harassment, hate speech, violation of election campaign rules, and finally, fake news and deepfakes. In these cases, social media must have quick and transparent procedures to take down the illegal content and address associated technical problems. If not, they must be responsible for the damage caused by the content and eventually punished. Fake news needs here a special approach, but I leave that to the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very very much for your really interesting insights and perspectives. Perhaps, okay, I had a lot of questions, but I will just pose one and then I will open the Q&A, okay, because I'm sure that you have a lot of questions that you want to ask to our participants. So, mine is a perspective question in the sense that how do you foresee the future of regulation, taking in consideration, in the case of EU particularly, the measures that Gergely just really in a synthetic way present us, the policies that are being think and implemented. How can we then foresee the regulation of social media? It's for all of you. I don't want to pick it first.
And you're looking at me.
Yeah, because I was right side.
Okay, I think I will repeat myself a bit, but I think we need very comprehensive yet upper level framework, something which will be generic enough, not to go too much specific to the platform itself, because those features again are changing, the circumstances are changing. We need something which will be also bound to the general legislation like human rights, freedom of speech, so the right from those basic laws, yet lacking the technology. And I had this interesting conversation with my friend back from my institute, Sarah Carter. She's doing PhD in ethics in technology. And one of the things that came up to our mind is like, first of all, it has to be stated clearly, those services are not free. Right? Let's get over it. It's somebody has to pay the bill for this huge data center that works for us, right? And so where is it coming from? So it has to be going down to the raising awareness of general public. These services are not free, and then having options. So, for instance, I'm using YouTube, right? A lot of you do. I'm paying for YouTube, so I'm having a Prime account. And this way I avoid advertising because it's very annoying to me and I hate it when I'm in the middle of something very interesting and suddenly buy ice creams, or something, I don't know. So I absolutely hate that, so I am willing to pay the price and it's all gone. And I think there should be options like that for social media and other services too. So, for instance, I could declare I don't want my data to be collected or used, but I pay the price. So how much does it cost to keep this service running for me over a year? Is it 100 euro, 200 euro? Okay, I pay it, I opt out. Because I buy myself out, basically. Then maybe there could be some middle solution, I don't know, half paid, but you're still aware that some part of your data will be used, but that has to be specific. And then freemium option, which is basically you trade in yourself your data and you use your account happily as you do now for free, but you are aware that your data is being used to cover the cost. So I think it's all about being blunt and clear on how this business works. So, because, everybody would like those services to be totally free and not collecting any data and everything will be great, but that's not valid, how those businesses will operate. They cannot operate, they have to make money. They have to make money somehow, the business model is as it is. So I would say I would go towards legislation which would incentivize companies for a better transparency and more options for its customers. So as you said, if you want to be treated like a customer as such, then okay, become a customer, real customer, pay for the services, and then you can expect. If you get it free, there's not much you can expect.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll give one of my answers. It's basically it's not an answer. It's a fear. I do it now because it's very pessimistic. So we will have the time to go in a different direction later. So I think that we are sitting in the room here, white people, middle class, from EU, and we are talking about human rights approach, which is really nice. I talked about we should err on the side of the freedom of expression and stuff like that. I have a serious fear that in 15 years, nobody will care about freedom of expression. We could see what's happening in China. We could see what's happening in India, in Singapore, in South America. So I have that serious fear that what our our approach to the legislation, what you mentioned, I like that. I think I should disagree a bit with how the big companies will use GDPR as an international norm. It would be great to see that, but I think, or I have a fear that we will see more and more, just because of the numbers, we will see more and more non-democratic approach growing in that new field of media. So just compare it. There are 7 billion, more than 7.5 billion people in the world. 4 billion people are using the internet. Approx 40, it was the Q2 or Q3, I can't remember, from last year. It was that in Western Europe and in America, approx 80-90% are using the internet. There is not much margin for growing. In Africa, in South America, there are 30% of the population using the internet. More and more will come. So I have this serious fear, I could say that. So that's not an answer, I know, but it's something I think we shouldn't forget.
Just briefly to say a few words and to try to answer this question. I think that if we continue so persistently on regulation, we'll come to what you, Gergely, have mentioned, that in one moment we'll have a totally stifled or somehow suppressed freedom of expression on the internet in general. Because now we concentrate on the big platforms. We accuse them of being gatekeepers or not being gatekeepers from different sides. We raise many accusations against these platforms. But we should think also generally about the environment. What environment do we want to have? What type of media environment we would like to have for the future? Whether we would like to have a free and seamless internet and permissionless. This is very important. Because if we start, let's say, giving licenses to some of the operators on the internet, I think that will kill the internet as it has been established and how it operates and how we know it. So I think that we have to think again about these particular mechanisms that we are going to, or we wish to be applied by the media in this very complex and different media environment. Can we apply the regulation that we already know about traditional media to social platforms? Or we have to think about something new? In my view, this new mechanism proposed by Facebook, this is my personal suspicion, that it has been elaborated and going to be raised, and it would be to the benefit of governments, not to the benefit of users. This is my suspicion. Still, I don't know what will happen, how it will expand, what type of case law will be accumulated there, what kind of practice. But I have this deep suspicion that is not to the benefit of users, and it is not to the benefit of freedom of expression.
So, the future of regulation. I would pay to know, but I don't. I think at the UL level, the self-regulatory approach is a fair approach in this in nowadays environments. So I think we are trying do so, and we hope we get good. We get benefits from that, but I don't have really. I cannot grasp the future. I cannot see what will be the path. I don't know. I really don't.
It's a complex issue.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing really interesting to add. First, I think the difficulties that we face when we try to have a universal regulation of something, it's not an excuse to not try in regional areas like the European Union. And because, well, at the end of the day, the European market is significantly relevant to constitute a severe problem to companies like social media, Google, Facebook, and the others. And I think data protection is a good example that we can actually empower European citizens, and there's a possibility, that's what I said, GDPR becomes a universal standard because, well, the market is so relevant and in somehow it's so rich that it's very important for these big companies to operate here freely, and for them it's easier to comply with those rules. It's even easier than for the smaller companies. So that's why that's a good example. Antitrust is much more difficult, obviously. Some severe errors were already committed when Facebook bought other media, and now it's obviously more difficult to separate the company in several small ones. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have time for questions. So perhaps we'll pick. No, you may start. You may start. That was not what I'm going to say. We'll pick all the questions first, and then they will be answered. I believe for time management.
You go first.
Someone please.
So I've been wondering, because a lot of you have mentioned freedom of expression, and obviously I think that's a value that we all share. But then when we talk about it in the abstract, I just wonder if we all agree on what that means. So often it seems to be couched in these terms of just let everyone say whatever they want. But then the reality of that, to take like a small example, especially on social media, often means that, for example, women are the target of much more violent, sexualized attacks. So while a male politician or a male journalist might get told, you're an idiot, or you're a hack, or even threatened with death threats, female journalists or politicians get told, I am going to cut out your uterus. And, and the result of that being then they're not free to express themselves, right? So in theory, this idea that we just let everyone say whatever they want and that'll work itself out results in a lot of people not freely participating and not freely expressing themselves. So I'm just curious what you all mean when you talk about freedom of expression.
We've been talking a lot about regulation, right? But there are two major splits in this. And I think this goes against what we're talking about, the antitrust. So we have the content delivers, which we all agree could be Facebook, Google, whatever. And then we have the content producers. And then we go to the content producers, we can have advertisement agencies. And we can have people in general that will produce the fake news. So when we talk about regulation, the advertisement agencies, they are already regulated or not. And when we talk about regulating the social media, are we talking about the content who delivers the content, who produces the content, who is where the responsibility clearly stays with the advertisement agency? Because it's completely different talking about fake news produced by one individual or talking about something that is produced by an advertisement agency. And when we say that we don't know who's behind it, well, Facebook for sure knows who's behind that advertisement agency because they need to make money. So where are the boundaries on the regulation? Are we treating everything as a whole, or are we supposed to split it? And I think that's already in place when we talk about splitting.
Answers?
There is another question.
I'm sorry.
Sure. Just want to piggyback on the first question, I think. To me, there's this large question about what is free speech for? That is free speech a means to an end? Is it a means to a healthy and robust democracy? Or is free speech the byproduct, the end in and of itself? In other words, we have a healthy democracy, by definition, we want to make sure we guarantee more freedom of speech. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the panelists, thought 50 years down the future and thought about this concern that in 50 years people won't care about freedom of speech. My concern is that 50 years down the future, our commitment to free speech may ironically be what in fact undermines democracy. And that would be the most fascinating and tragic irony if our democracies crumble under a degree of commitment to free speech that allows for all of the disinformation that's sort of already undermining the democratic process to take hold to a greater degree. So we could, that's more obviously a statement than a question. But actually, one other point related to this is that we often make this claim too that this is a space where things move very fast and policy can change from week to week. All of this is a result of a policy that was written in 1996. Think about that. Section 230 of the Communications Act was written in 1996 to guarantee that America Online's bulletin board service could have free and sort of unhindered speech. And most people in this room are thinking, what the hell is America Online's bulletin board service?
Yeah.
And that's my point. So we have new technologies that are regulated under legislation that predates the very existence of these technologies and services. So they don't move as fast as we might like, and that's creates some important points of tension that we have to consider.
Thank you. So, one speaker first, and then Lukasz.
There's another one.
We don't have time, I'm sorry. During the coffee break, you will ask whatever you want to ask, okay? Sorry, but we are really getting late. So, freedom of speech. What's to start?
I don't want to monopolize. So first, I will go to Phil, and I agree. I think it's a kind of a big joke or paradox that actually a freedom of speech actually endangers democracy, but it's true. And if we think about every public gathering, there is a need for moderation right now. If we allow everybody speak loud here, there'll be a mess. And there will be this meeting will have no purpose, right? So actually I'm looking into dialogue theory and implementation in social media and virtual reality as a solution. But that implies moderation. And if we look even other digital serious meetings, we always have moderation because that's the only way to preserve constructiveness in any discourse. So I think there is a need to tackle that. Second question, I think I would take the burden a bit off shoulders of platform providers. I would go to content creators because in a way it's true what they say, we deliver, but what is delivered to us, we cannot look at everything. Like currently in Dublin they have like 15,000 moderators and they increase this number all the time. Those people require 24/7 psychological support. Those people are depressed because when they go through all kind of nonsense and very dark content, they are affected. They are human beings and they have to go through all this so you don't. So they take the burden off you, but they have to go through it and it's no fun, believe me, So there is much dark things there. So I would say, let's focus on those who produce. And why? Also because we talk social media, but what about other means of content delivery, like Google? I don't know, there was an interesting article lately and it thought that actually Google also contributed to change in the election in the US by moderating the results. So some people saw some results and some people didn't. And that actually made a significant change in voting and was proven. So suddenly, it's not only social media anymore, it's all kind of platforms who can influence us this way or the other. So let's not be too specific and let's focus what is the actual content that we are serving, who is behind it, and there has to be, again, I said, there has to be transparency. So if I see content, I have to see this is done by BBC. Okay, maybe I can trust that. This is sent by Mr. Joe from Kansas. Okay. Maybe not really to follow, so maybe I shouldn't share that, So I think there is a need for transparency, and we have to think how to moderate our conversations online.
Well, a very brief answer to a very broad question. What's the meaning of freedom of expression? I would say that first we need to think that freedom of expression was not established in the Declaration of Rights and in the constitutions to say nice things. It's to criticize and it allows the players to be aggressive. And sometimes if you want to go to the public sphere and be aggressive, you become hurt because other players also respond aggressively. So I think oversensitive players, perhaps they should stay out of the arena. That's my view. Obviously we need moderation, but the limits of freedom of expression are very well established in a wide set of jurisprudence, and I believe that social media are not enough to change the conclusions that the constitutional scholars reached and constitutional judge reached over more than 200 years. So it's at least too soon to say that this doctrine is not enough, and we need to start creating something new about that. Thank you.
Sorry. Just very briefly. Yes, about freedom of expression. Let's remember that it is not only a right, it's not an obligation. It's a right given to everyone, but also value and principle in democracy. So I think that it is so fundamentally related to democracy that you're right, Facebook or social platforms or news intermediaries or advertising agents, they cannot change it. But here the problem is how to protect it in the best possible manner, and whether more regulation yields more protection of this right and principle. And I would like to refer to a decision of the European Court of Human Rights, where it is explicitly said that we shouldn't think about new media or social platforms or whatever exists now with the knowledge about traditional media. We have to think about completely new mechanisms, completely new models of regulation. Then about the problem, who should be regulated? I agree that those who produce content, they should be regulated. And these entities that perform like intermediaries or disseminators, that they're pure conduits and they don't change content, they should be held liable for disseminating this content. And about the complexities and the difficulties nowadays. Yes, we speak about regulation, but it is now most of this regulation is mostly national regulation. So there are national laws that are created by different states, and through these national laws we would like to solve cross-border issues that arise on the internet or because of the operation of the new platforms and intermediaries. And this is how the whole environment becomes even more complicated, and issues are not solved, they are augmented.
Okay, just three very, very short one. So the first about the CDA 230. Basically most of the world don't agree with that. So we are trying to find different solutions. So I do understand that this is not from this is not from the last 2 years or 3 years, but still there are different approaches to tackle that. And the second one is about what I spoke about, or what I told about the future. Is that if we see, and this is very closely connected to what the professor said about the 8-year-old child, that my favorite country is definitely Turkey. Turkey and freedom of expression, so I really like that. Because Turkey went Turkey was blocking the whole Google. As it just shut down the Google. And then Google went to the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights said that, oh, don't do that again, and Turkey promised that never again. Of course, 2 years later, they blocked YouTube. And then 2 years later, they blocked Wikipedia. And nothing happened. So I think that the problem is not only the legislation and the lack of legislation or the existence of legislation, but the problem is that we don't really have the means to have the execution or to have those kind of arbitrary issues in hand. And one last thing, that we have the European Court of Human Rights. We have the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Well, a bit worse or less practice, but still. We have a Court of Human Rights in Africa. And the hypothetical question is, do we have a Court of Human Rights in Asia? And the answer is no. So there are ways to tackle in that part of the... thank you.
So thank you very much to our guests and to our audience. Now we'll have a coffee.